few weeks back, we started a new series aimed at giving us practical tools that we can use to grow our internal world and see our very nature change in the image of Jesus. Now, a key scripture for our series is found in 2 Corinthians 3:18. And we all, who with unveiled faces contemplate the Lord's glory, are being transformed into his image with ever-increasing glory, which comes from the Lord who is the Spirit. Now, the word translated transformed or transfigured comes from the Greek word that we get the English word metamorphosis from. And it means the change of the form or nature of a thing or person into a completely different one. What Paul is saying here is that if you hold yourself in the presence of Jesus, consciously aware of him, not focused on yourself, you will be changed at a fundamental level into a new being created in the very likeness and nature of God. Now, we can speed up the internal change that Jesus began in us when we committed our lives to him by intentionally spending time in his presence. That is a staggering thought because it takes your spiritual growth out of the realm of wishful thinking and spiritual mumbo-jumbo and places it firmly in your hands. Now, I propose 5 key disciplines that I found in my life enable me to experience the presence of God, and they were waiting on God, not just for God, worshipping God in spirit and in truth, not just singing songs, meditating on the Word, not just reading it, praying in the Spirit according to God's will, not your own, and the 5th one was fasting. Now, when you add fasting to any of the other 4, you can increase their effectiveness exponentially. Then I said there were 3 important components of each of these disciplines: humility, intentionality, and the presence of God. The experience of the presence of God being the goal of each discipline. Now, before we dive into this week's message, I want to add a very important footnote. Now, whilst I have been endeavouring to give you a prescriptive formula that you can follow to gain real, measurable benefits in your spiritual growth and inner world, be careful that you don't fall into fall completely onto the side of a scientific Western approach to life. Because it's not the only worldview out there, and it can't provide you with all of the answers that you're looking for. Now, what do I mean by that? While science has provided us with some great advantages and advances in our understanding of the natural world around us, we need to be fully aware of its limitations. You only have to look at the online diet wars to realise that smart people with PhDs who publish research papers on nutrition don't always see eye to eye on the best form of eating to optimise people's health. In fact, at times it seems that the more we know, the more we tend to disagree with each other. In the West, we have been programmed to take a mechanistic approach to life, and we do everything we can to figure things out and break everything down into blocks or units of knowledge that we then apply repeatedly in order to control the outcome of our lives. Now, it doesn't take long, however, to realise that this approach falls far short of our experienced reality. There are things we can't explain. There are things we have no control over. Science can't explain love or our inbuilt sense of morality. Science can't answer the questions of purpose and meaning, and yet without them, our lives would be so much less than they are. Now, why am I bringing this up today? Why am I talking about this? Am I trying to hedge my bets, with everything that I've been promising? The reason that I'm bringing it up is because I don't want you to become discouraged if things don't change as quickly as you might have been hoping. There is more to life and God's activity in the world than we have ever been able to figure out. These disciplines aren't meant as a rod for our backs. They aren't the be-all and end-all of life with Jesus. They will help you, absolutely. But you're not going to get tested on them. You see, lives are built over over years of consistent behaviours. And if it takes the next 10 years for you to work these things into your life, that's totally fine. Sometimes we can make messages kind of like a do or die proposition. I don't want you to think that. At the same token, I don't want you to take this lightly, because you'd be extremely wise to make every effort to engage with this current series and put into practice the things that we're talking about, because they do offer you a way to see tangible, real change occurring in your inner world. So, this week I want to unpack the second of our disciplines, worshipping God in spirit and in truth, not just singing songs. We had a bit of trouble with that TV this morning, so it's no longer here, so I don't know which slide I'm up to, so I'll turn around and have a look at it every now and again. The Bible is very clear that worship is a natural expression of love and adoration by all of creation for its creator. Not just you and I, but the natural world all around us sings out praise to God by the very fact of its existence. It reflects back to God facets of his grandeur, his beauty, and his power. When you look at a beautiful sunset or watch the waves crash in on a beach, we're getting a glimpse of the beauty and the power of the one who created both. Their existence is an act of worship because they're reflecting back to God attributes of his nature and character. In Psalm 19 verse 1 we read, "The heavens proclaim the glory of God, the skies display his craftsmanship. Day after day they continue to speak, night after night they make him known. They speak without a word, without a sound or word. Their voice is never heard, yet their message has gone throughout the earth, and their words to all the world." One of the quickest ways to enter into the presence of God, which is what this series is all about, bringing our hearts into the presence of God. One of the quickest ways to enter into the presence of God is to worship him. In Psalm 100 verse 4 we read, "Enter his gates with thanksgiving, go into his courts with praise, give thanks to him and praise his name." Psalm 22 verse 3 says that God inhabits the praises of his people. Another translation puts it, he is enthroned in the praises of his people. Now here's the truth. God is everywhere at once, and we call this superpower of his omnipresence. However, we're quite often unaware that he's even there. But when we worship him, we switch on, as it were, our receiver, and all of a sudden he comes through loud and clear. Now the issue isn't whether his presence is here with us. The issue is always about our attention. See, it's not a case of breaking through into the presence of God, but rather a case of breaking free from the things that are holding our attention captive. True worship takes our attention off ourselves and places it firmly on God. Now there's a fascinating story found in the book of John, where John talks about an interaction that Jesus had with a Samaritan woman at a well around about midday. His disciples had gone into town to buy some food, and Jesus was thirsty. When the woman came to the well, Jesus asks her for a drink, and then immediately gets into a profoundly deep spiritual conversation with her about living water. Now you get the impression from her response to him that she doesn't think it's all that profound, and she's just humouring him and isn't taking him all that seriously, until Jesus tells her something about her life that completely shocks her. Jesus had just told her that the water he could give her would never run out, and she replies with what I think would have been a fairly sarcastic tone. "Please, sir," the woman said, "give me this water, then I'll never be thirsty again, and I won't have to come here to get water. Go and get your husband." And I think at that point in time, Jesus realised that he's completely lost her. She's just not getting what he's trying to, give her. And so he says to her, "Go and get your husband." And at that point, everything changes. And the lady says, "I don't have a husband." And Jesus said, "You're right. You don't have a husband, For you've had 5 husbands, and you aren't even married to the man you're living with now. You certainly spoke the truth." And then what this lady does is what so many of us do when we feel exposed. She tries to divert the conversation. And she says, "Sir, you must be a prophet, so tell me, why is it that you Jews insist that Jerusalem is the only place of worship, while we Samaritans claim it is here at Mount Gerizim, where our ancestors worshipped?" You know, this is a lady who has just had her life opened up for her in public. The Jews and the Samaritans didn't have a very good relationship. The Jews looked down on the Samaritans, and the Samaritans felt quite defensive about that. And there's this debate about where they should worship God. Because the Samaritans said, "Well, we worship the same God as the Jews, but we worship God over here on our mountain, but the Jews reckon they've got to worship God over there." And the Jews were the larger group, and they considered Samaritans beneath them. And so this lady has just had her life opened up to her by a Jew. She's feeling bad about herself, and she tries to deflect. And then Jesus answers her. And I think at this point she realises, hang on a minute, he's not like normal Jews. He says to her, "Believe me, dear woman," just that alone, treats her with respect. "The time is coming when it will no longer matter whether you worship the Father on this mountain or in Jerusalem. You Samaritans know very little about the one you worship, while we Jews know all about him, for salvation comes through the Jews. But the time is coming, indeed it's here now, when true worshippers will worship the Father in spirit and in truth. The Father is looking for those who will worship him that way." Now this particular story, I think, is fascinating on so many different levels, and we could spend weeks unpacking it and the hope that is found in it. However, this morning I want to zero in on the last thing that Jesus said. For worship to be accepted by the Father, it has to engage both your heart and your mind. And when it does, it ushers you into the presence of God, where you are transformed in your very nature, changed bit by bit into a copy of his. You become more and more like Jesus. For worship to be true worship, it has to engage our hearts and our minds. John Piper said this about worship. He said, "Truth without emotion produces dead orthodoxy and a church full of artificial admirers. On the other hand, emotion without truth produces empty frenzy and cultivates shallow people who refuse the discipline of rigorous thought. But true worship comes from people who are deeply emotional and who love deep and sound doctrine. Strong affectations for God, rooted in truth, are the bone and marrow of biblical worship." This was a huge issue for Jesus. He hated hypocrisy, especially the hypocrisy of those who should know better, the religious. Just going through the motions on the outside was never going to cut it for him. If your heart wasn't in it, then even if your doctrine was perfect, it wasn't acceptable to the Father. You hear it when he talks about some of the teachers of the law and the Pharisees, when he said this, "Woe to you, teachers of the law and Pharisees, you hypocrites! You are like whitewashed tombs, which look beautiful on the outside, but on the inside are full of the bones of the dead and everything unclean." Now, to a Jew, that was a shocking statement to be making to them. "In the same way, on the outside you appear to people as righteous, but on the inside you are full of hypocrisy and wickedness." Now, I grew up in the Catholic Church, and for much of my childhood, church services were incredibly boring. That's no reflection on the Catholic Church, that's a reflection on what was going on inside of me. They didn't touch my heart at all. I sang the songs, prayed the prayers, stood up, kneeled down, gave the sign of peace, genuflected when I had to, and all the way through, my heart remained untouched and everything seemed dry and monotonous. That was until I made a decision on my own. Nobody told me I needed to do this. Nobody encouraged me to do this. Nobody explained this to me. But I made a decision on my own at about the age of 14 or 15 that I was going to mean everything I sang, prayed or said at Mass. Now, I know for some of you who maybe have grown up in Pentecostal churches right now, you're thinking, where did he went on to Catholic Church? You need to get over that religious spirit. If you think you've got it perfect, if you think your doctrine's perfect, please go and find another church, because none of us are perfect in our doctrine. None of us have got it right completely. I think we're pretty close, but at the age of 14 or 15, I decided that I was going to mean everything I sang, prayed or said at church. And even though I had said and prayed and sung those words over and over again until I could do an entire Mass with my eyes closed, those words that had been so dry up until that point burst into life, and I experienced God's presence in a way that I had never experienced it before as a 14, 15-year-old kid in a Catholic Mass. It was like turning on a light bulb in a dark room. Everything came to life. Now, when I was preparing this during the week, I was sitting at my desk, and I thought I'd give you a bit of an example of what it was like. And you know how men can't multitask? Well, women tell us we can't multitask. Actually, nobody can multitask. It's a furphy. But they say men can't multitask. I can say the Lord's Prayer while counting how many people are in each row in front of me. I sat at my desk and I said the Lord's Prayer, because I have said the Lord's Prayer so many times in Mass when I was a kid growing up, that I can say the Lord's Prayer without even thinking about the words. So I can do something totally different while saying the Lord's Prayer. And I did that. I was sitting at my desk and I had something open on my desk, and I read the words as I was saying with my mouth the Lord's Prayer. And then I stopped and I did this. Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be your name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from the evil one. For thine is the kingdom, the power, and the glory, forever and ever. Amen. And as I prayed that, and even then, as I was praying that, I felt the presence of God. I touched God's heart. I felt I was in the presence of God. What was the difference? The difference was, the first one I did it by rote, when I said it at my desk, reading something else. And the second one was that I actually meant the words that I was saying. And as I injected my heart and my mind into that process, I found myself being brought into the very presence of God. And it's when you come into the presence of God that something supernatural takes place. As we gaze upon the glory of God, we are changed from glory to glory into his image. You've got to get yourself into the presence of God. The quickest way to get there, or one of the quickest ways to get there, is through worship. You see, when you stand before God, you won't be able to use the excuse that church was boring, or that they didn't sing songs that touched your heart. Because church worship has never been about you. We don't come to church to worship you. It's all about Jesus. Our worship is directed to him. If you don't get anything out of worship, that's okay, because we're not worshipping you. But if God doesn't get anything out of your worship, you're in a perilous place. There is no such thing as an anointed song. There are some songs that you will have an affinity to that help you focus maybe a little bit more on Jesus. They might even trigger a little bit of nostalgia when you sing them, but the anointing or presence of God is felt by people who engage their hearts and minds to worship Him. Songs don't attract God's presence. People attract God's presence. Therefore, I can experience the presence of God when singing a song written 300 years ago as easily as I can experience the presence of God singing the latest Hillsong chorus if I engage my heart and my mind to focus on Jesus through the words that I'm singing and I worship Him in spirit and in truth. Here's the take home. God is looking for those who will worship Him in spirit and in truth, who won't just sing songs but will use those songs to engage their hearts and mind to focus wholly on Him. But the time is coming, indeed it's here now, when true worshippers will worship the Father in spirit and in truth. The Father is looking for those who will worship Him that way. Stop and think for a moment. If God is looking for something, don't you want to be the person who can give Him what He's looking for? If it's time spent in His presence that transforms us in our inner being, then engaging in an activity that He's attentive to has to be a no-brainer. If I could have the musos back, that'd be fantastic. Which is why I can't understand how people who are called Christians can stand during worship and not engage with their whole heart and mind with the words that they are singing. You see, you don't have to go to a Catholic church to lose your way. You can lose your way here at Grace just as easily. When your heart becomes callous and you start going through the motions without engaging in the truth of what it is that you're doing, you can lose your relationship with God and you won't even realize it's happening until it's gone. In relationships, we call it drift. Drift can happen in your relationship with God just as easily as it can happen with your relationship with your spouse or those who are close to you. You see, genuine worship takes your focus off yourself and your current situation and places it firmly on God. When your focus is on God, you open yourself to His presence. As you spend time in His presence, you are transformed. Now, when I wrote those words this week during my preparation of this message, I stopped for a moment and I held my heart before Jesus. I did what I talked about in my last message about waiting on God. And the first thing that popped into my head was that I was a failure and didn't deserve to sit there in God's presence. That was the first thing. I'll stop, I'll just wait on God. The first thing that comes in my head, you're a failure, you don't deserve to sit here in God's presence. But fortunately, over the years, I've learned how to deal with that voice. Because that voice is quite common. It's common to all of us. And I said to myself, that's right. That's absolutely right. And that's why Jesus had to come. Because I couldn't do it myself. We're all failures. Jesus had to come because of that. So that's not a reason that isn't a hindrance for me coming to Jesus. My failings aren't a hindrance for me coming into the presence of Jesus. And yet our minds will tell us, the enemy of our souls will tell us that we shouldn't be there in the presence of Jesus because we're a failure. Because we just haven't, we yelled at the kids, we weren't compassionate to our wives, we didn't pray as much as we should have prayed this week. And there's all sorts of reasons and justifications, but the reality of it is Jesus came because God knew that we couldn't live perfect lives. So Jesus lived the perfect life that we couldn't live. Then He died in the place of each of us to pay for the price of the imperfect lives that we live. And so we can now come into His presence because He's already dealt with all that stuff. So I sat there and I brought my heart into the presence of Jesus. And I felt His presence touching my heart. It is that easy. It is that easy. To bring yourself into the presence of Jesus is actually quite easy. If if you can get over all of the excuses that you throw up to stop it from happening. When you're worshipping at church, like when we come together and we worship at church, there will be all sorts of distractions that will come up. They're par for the course, but you need to learn ways to refocus on the one that you're singing about. Every Sunday, now I sit down the front, right? So I don't actually turn around and see what you guys are doing. But sometimes, to be honest with you, I'm amazed that these guys up here look so happy and sing so well, because there have been times when I have looked up and seen people reading their phone and just sort of looking around and mouths not even moving. And they just sort of, it's almost like, oh, we're just waiting for this bit to get through until we get to the, the announcements and the preaching. And it's like, I don't get that. I don't understand that. See, worship isn't the warm-up for the rest of the service. Yeah, worship does give us an opportunity to leave what we were doing outside and get ourselves focused on Jesus. But that should only happen during the first song. By the time the first song is over, you should be engaging with Jesus. Because here's the thing. You know the experience of worship we had at the beginning of this service? That is gone. You're never going to get that opportunity back. It's over. How many opportunities in life have we let pass by that could have seen some incremental change happening on the inside of us as we engage our hearts to sit there with Jesus? How many opportunities have we allowed to pass by that now, maybe a little bit later in life, we look back and go, man, if I had just consistently engaged my heart and worshipped Him in spirit and in truth every opportunity that I had, maybe I wouldn't be struggling in my marriage right now. Maybe I wouldn't be struggling in my sense of where am I going to be going. Listen, everyone struggles, right? We all struggle. We all go through things in life. But if you have allowed your internal world to change because you have diligently, consistently brought yourself into His presence, then you'll find that you'll have the strength, you'll have the ability just to go that one extra day that sees you turn a corner. Because your internal world will change. The Bible says you will become like Jesus on the inside. Jesus doesn't have to try and be good. Jesus doesn't have to try and be loving. Jesus doesn't have to try and fill out his tax return without adding things in there that he shouldn't. Jesus doesn't have to try to do that because he just lives out of his nature. And his nature automatically does good. That's what he's changing us to be like on the inside. Worship gives us that opportunity to do that. Each week that passes is an opportunity that you'll never get back. As I said this morning, we started worship right at the beginning of our service. That opportunity is now gone. It's over. It's never coming back. And if you're feeling a little bit lousy right now, because you're thinking about how distracted you were during that time of worship, it's okay every now and again to feel a little bit lousy. If it motivates you the next time around not to do what you just did. I don't mind feeling lousy at times. I don't mind feeling like a failure at times. I don't mind feeling like, I can't cope with this at times, because it drives me closer to the one who can help me, who's Jesus. So if you're feeling a little bit bad right now, you're thinking, why was he speaking to me? So I can't actually see really clearly out there. So when I look over here, see, David's got his eyes closed. He's praying right at the moment. Now if I look over there, David could think, oh, he's picking on me. Or if I look up here, and you think I'm picking on you. I'm not actually, because you're a bit blurry. And I can't really see all that well. But if you are feeling a little bit kind of, that's not bad. That's not bad. I'm not giving you a hard time about it much. I'm giving you enough of a hard time so that you remember that next time you have an opportunity to worship God, you're not going to let it slide. You're going to use it. Don't ever become too familiar with what you're doing that you fail to engage your heart and mind fully with Jesus. When we worship at church, it's the time where you transition from the outside world into His presence, where you drop off everything that's been going on externally and you focus on Him. Don't be one of those people who hang around outside, never entering in. Let's stand.